Hello and welcome to the Green Collar Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Almanzar, a practicing environmental attorney and former environmental scientist. This podcast is all about exploring careers in sustainability in the environmental field, what they look like, how to get started, and how to grow into them. Each episode, I sit down with professionals who have built meaningful careers in this space to hear their stories, how they got started, the challenges they faced, and the advice I have for anyone looking to break in or level up. Whether you're a student, a career changer, or just passionate about making a difference, these conversations will have something valuable for you. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Let's dive right in. Hello and welcome to the Green Collar Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Almanzar, and with me today I have the honor of speaking with Professor George Homsy. Professor Homsy is the chair of the Department of Environment and Sustainability at my alma mater, proud to say Binghamton University. Professor Homsy, how are you?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Happy Friday, as they say, right?
Yes.
So last time we connected via email a few weeks ago, you were all over the place. And as rightfully so have I been. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm actually on campus in my office, finally back at home base, struggling to get through the summer.
Now, one of the benefits of being a professor and a teacher and just being in academia is that you get a little break in the summer. Why are you in the office in July?
Because that is one of the fallacies people think of is for professors. We don't get a break. While during the school year, we try and work with students a lot. During the summer, I have to produce my research. And so at this moment, yesterday I sent back a paper to a co-author. We're trying to finish up one paper. I have to start another one next week. I'm going to meet colleagues in Pittsburgh and we're going to work on another paper. So we have to get the research out.
So let me ask you, are you at liberty to discuss the current paper that you're working on?
Oh, sure. Oh, yes.
Can you give me kind of just a brief overview for, what the outline might look like?
Yep. So this will be really interesting and relevant to your to the podcast topic. We did my colleague Christina Marty and I did 59 interviews with sustainability leaders from across the country, all in local government. And so we were asking, and we're doing a whole series of papers about. The first paper was about policy. It actually was about environmental justice and renter, and we can talk about that later, but about the idea of how do you improve the condition for renters in terms of energy. Most of them are about the actual administration of being. So this one, the paper that I'm working on now, is how nonprofits and local governments work together around sustainability, because we didn't actually go in thinking about this. But as we talked to people, 49 of the 59 people who we talked to said, we engage this nonprofit, we engage this nonprofit. And they're not all environmental nonprofits either. A lot of them are community organizations. And so we said, no one's really talked about that in academia before. And so, we mined our interviews for that. And so we're putting that paper out. And I'll talk about this perhaps a little bit later on, another one, but we have another paper that's under review now about leadership traits and what people expect of sustainability leaders. So we've asked a lot of questions. We actually have one paper that I'm supposed to be writing right now, which is about failures and why do sustainability leaders fail and what they do about it. We've presented that at a conference, but the actual words on the paper are coming a lot slower because everything takes longer than you expect.
Yeah, and you've been in academia for a bit. How many years would you say that you've been kind of in the space?
I've been a professor here at Binghamton University, and this is my only job for about 13 years.
Okay.
13, 14, yeah, 13 years.
And under your belt, you have, I would say, how many published either sole or co-authored papers?
I have 22 peer-reviewed papers, and I have probably a half a dozen or 8 book chapters. I have a co-authored EPA report that I did with the agency a few years back. We also do, we've produced for this project, and I try and do it for every project. we produce and try and get into the public, especially with practitioners, we try and do um, issue briefs. So, practitioners don't necessarily want to read all the stuff that we put into an academic paper, but we want these to be useful. And so we produce a different version that talks about what we found. And we've been distributing these on our own to our interviewees. And one of them ended up in the hands of someone working on a project in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And so we've been talking to them about how we can help them as they try and organize local government people around this issue of energy efficiency in rental units. And often I've done this through the American Planning Association and the International City County Management Association. We've sent things out to their members, to try and get them, just to understand what we've done, and hopefully they'll be useful to them.
So, in terms of when you get an idea to write, a paper, necessarily not from somebody approaching you to co-author with them, but something from you, what questions, like, how do you go about that process? I'm really curious as to how you go about the process of like the question that you're trying to answer.
Oh, this is a little bit of self-examination here. It starts with a question. So I see something, and I think this is the way many academics work. I don't want to make it just to be me, but we see something that interests us. And we say, I want to know more about that. So in the case of what we're doing now, I've always had this interest in studying local government. And, to more or lesser extent, people don't always interview the sustainability leaders at local levels. Some have, some haven't. And so that's where that started. What is their perspective? What are their challenges? And then, of course, it multiplies, because then I bring on my partner, because I did initiate this general topic. And then my partner, Christina, had all these ideas for, well, what about this aspect and that aspect? And so there's a lot of collaboration involved that we sort of, and then we develop the questions, we develop our methodology, how we will interview people, who will we choose? And then we ask the questions, and then you just start writing, and some things don't work out the way you wanted, and some things are like we had this paper on leadership traits that we have under review now. That was specifically a question that we asked. I knew we wanted to write about that. But this question about nonprofits that we're working on now, that developed because we listened as we were doing our interviews, and then heard this over and over and over again. The same with the failure paper. Well, we did specifically ask people, why did projects fail? So we do actually have that in there. But in that, we heard in our interviews, what made it really interesting is this idea of failure. It's not really, like, a lot of them don't fail. I'm being a little bit dramatic, but a lot of people say, well, I guess I would call a failure this, but I'm just waiting for the right time. And it's like, almost for some of them, they don't fail because they have to wait out an administration, or they have to find more money, or they have to go back into the drawing board, but they want to get something done. And a lot of these people push. And that, is also a good lesson, and that will, be part of that paper as well.
There's so many factors to why projects, fail, especially in the nonprofit space. The one that seems to come up the most, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you've done the research on this, funding.
Yes.
If there was bottomless funding, most projects would prevail, but the funding is the biggest one that I see, at least. I wanted to ask you, you authored a paper either last year or the year before that focused on this inequities in African American, Black families, paying too much to essentially just keep their homes warm than the average American family. Where did that idea come from? Like, were you at a conference having a discussion with someone? Did something strike you while you were having coffee in the morning? Like, where did you come up with that from?
So and I don't think there was one like moment when I came up with it, but we spend a lot of time talking about environmental justice. And one of the challenges that many people in this space uh, work on is this idea of is it is intersectionality. Is it just that people are poor, or is it something else? Is it their race? Is it their ethnicity? Is it their religious background or where they live? Like, what are all the factors that are going into this? And so, what I was always looking for a chance to examine this, to say, is it both, or is poverty the biggest thing? And it probably is. I mean, I don't want to take away from, if people have more money, then issues of energy burden would go away, issues of food security would go away if people just got paid what they should get paid. So I don't want to say that, but I really wanted to look at this intersectionality between race and income. And so I happened upon a database that the Department of Energy had put together, and it had uh, energy burdens for every census tract in the country. So then me and my colleague, Kyun Kang, who's works at California State University, San Bernardino, she and I, we took all these census tracts, and then we added other factors to this data: income, race, because these weren't part of the data, the Department of Energy data. And then we ran analyses, and then we did find that even if people are making the same amount of money on average in a census tract, those census tracts with more Black families, more Black households, tended to have a higher energy burden. And so then we said, well, why is that? And of course, there are many reasons, only some of which we can examine at the national level through available data. But the ones we looked at, well, what about the tenure of the housing? Do they rent or do they own? Well, most Black families tend to rent. We also looked at the age of the homes that they're in. And most of these census tracts tend to have older homes. And these become proxies for, older homes tend to be less efficient. And so even if they're making the same amount of money, because of where they live, they have this extra burden. And that's what intersectionality is about. So even if you give these Black families the same amount of money on average, they will have a higher burden because of the structures that they live in, because of the neighborhoods that they live in. And if you and if they and because they tend to rent more, and rental units, they can't do as much about this situation as others.
This is a topic that in other contexts has been discussed, but only recently are we exploring kind of energy justice issues. But I mean, this takes me back to the landmark study in the 80s by the toxic waste and race,
Yep.
that, all things considered, race was still the dominant factor as to, families being exposed and individuals being exposed to hazardous, chemicals from toxic facilities, and that race was the number one factor. In a sense, it's great that we're able to explore these things, and the conclusions, are now being kind of highlighted. But it's also so sobering that this environmental justice movement in many ways has been going on, kind of in a national scale since the 60s, 70s. And we're still, in many ways, we're progressing, but we're still very close to where we started.
Yeah.
But I guess the hope is your hope when you put these papers out that you're answering a question that then a policymaker can grab onto and run with it? Is that your hope when you write these things? Like,
Yes, I think I'm because my previous careers have been examining these issues from different perspectives. I do want people to be able to do something with this. And so what's the lesson of this? The lesson is, you know, especially at the local government level, it's not just income. We can't just say those are poor people. We can't do anything about it. Especially, and you often can't do anything about poverty when you're just at the local government level, because that's a bigger issue. But if you have programs or go after programs, you can shape them to try, to aim them at renters, or to aim them at lower income homeowners, or to aim them in these neighborhoods where you may not go because you don't think people are interested in these issues, because they're different, because they're Black families, because they're Latino families, because, it's like you think, or you're not comfortable going there or something like that. It's just, you know, in these, we urge people to get out into the communities more. And that's where, tying back to the paper that we're trying to get out the door now, we see these sustainability leaders engaging these nonprofits and saying, all right, maybe we don't have enough people, the right people to go into these communities, but we can go to this group and ask this group to do it. Or in some cases, we can hire this group. And again, they're not necessarily environmental groups. One of the communities we talked to, they had a community development group in one of their marginalized neighborhoods, and they train them to do energy audits. So these people who are, already known to the community are coming in and saying, hey, you're losing all this energy, it's costing you money. And then this group would help you, because navigating contractors and figuring out how to do things is not always easy. They would help you do that. And so the local government is extending what they're able to do, because now they've got this group that's trusted, that knows the people, knows the area, and that they've trained to take this on. And so, we see creative ways that people are able to try and rectify these environmental justice challenges.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, I mentioned this when I spoke at the school back in April, after the panel on environmental careers. We had a nice sit down with some of the students that attended, and I was able to raise some of these environmental justice issues. And I directed some students to the book, Color of Law,
Yes.
by Richard, I think Rothstein.
Yes.
In any event, and I've read that book a few times now, and every time I read it, I'm just mind blown by the fact that we're putting band-aids on systems, and we need systems changes. I mean, we need to your point, if we created some incentives for renters, then and some tax breaks or some other incentives. It seems like all the incentives are for homeowners. And that's
Yes.
great. I'm not taking anything away from those incentives, but to really make an impact on energy injustice, you really have to address the fact that the sobering reality that most Black families, most Latino families are not homeowners. So
Yes.
how do we incentivize renters to take more energy efficient measures? Well, then money talks. You got to help people out. Anyway, I want to pivot for a moment, Professor Homsy. So where did you grow up? Tell us about your childhood.
Oh God, that was a long time ago. I don't remember much of it.
Well, you grew up where?
I grew up in Somerville, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, and it was a complete dense walkable community. And, it was, I was an urban planner for a while. It's without being planned, it was what urban planners really dream of. Mostly triple decker houses, 2 and 3 family houses, very few single families, great public transit. You could walk everywhere. And, that was the kind of place where I grew up. Working class families at the time. And it was excellent. Now, and it's just interesting to watch the change, because now I couldn't afford to live there, because this is such a great place to live because of all those things that I enjoyed growing up. There are no families there. It's all people who work in different industries, many of them young, but they make a lot of money. because the housing has become so expensive there.
Yeah, I lived outside of a little north of Somerville. Right after my time at Binghamton, I worked in with an environmental consulting firm in Burlington, Mass.
Oh, excellent.
And I was Somerville, beautiful neighborhood, but you're right. I mean, even then, 20 some odd years ago, real estate prices were really not inexpensive, let's call it.
Yeah.
And it's only increased since. And so you went to Cornell. Well, first of all, before we even get to college, and what was your childhood like at Somerville? Were you outdoors a lot? Were you an inside kid? Working on building things. Like what was it like for you?
We were kids who ran around the neighborhood all the time, as most kids in dense places, I hope, still do. But I'm just talking about this with my stepchildren as I'm like trying to get them off the computer and things. They're older now, so they they drive around on their own and things like that. But my father was a public school teacher, so we were definitely working class, but never we never wanted for we never had a lot, but never really wanted for anything. What did we do? My father was not a big outdoors person. He's like, I camped enough in the Army. I'll drive you. But we joined the Boy Scouts, and he would drive us to every camping trip. He would never stay. He would drop us off, let the other adults deal with us, and then he would go back home and then come pick us up.
Do you
But yes,
enjoy those? Do you recalling back at those camping trips with the Boy Scouts? Were those enjoyable for you as you remember?
Oh, yes. Oh, no. I loved being outside. I mean, with the whole having to feed yourself, the whole organization of it was fun. We went on this 50-mile canoe trip in Maine, which was like an adventure. And my wife and I still hike. We don't camp, but we still hike and go, hike around upstate New York, which is beautiful. It's unbelievable how nice it is to hike up here. And, we're always outdoors trying to, relax, trying to connect, trying to see different things, trying to stay in shape and all that stuff.
And then, eventually you made your way over to Tufts and you ended up with a BS in engineering psychology. And then eventually you worked for a while and worked your way over to Cornell. And then you got a PhD in city and regional planning. And I guess my question is, at what point in that evolution of your, academic to professional career did all of these things start coming into play where you were like, all right, I really want to focus my attention on environmental and sustainability?
And again, it's a thread,
Yep.
but it's not really a starting point. So when I worked at the local public radio station, I produced a documentary series about the cleanup of Boston Harbor, which at the time had just occurred. They spent a lot of money basically fixing the system so we were no longer polluting the water. And so it became, the harbor itself was hideously polluted. And then from there, I met with who's still the host of this public radio show called Living on Earth. And I met him, and we did, we still had other jobs, but we did a 4-part series for Earth Day in 1992, I believe. And it was it that? I can't remember the year. Don't hold me to the year. And it was, and we put it on public radio, and it got picked up by 60 stations. So we said, oh, there's something here for us. And so we started Living on Earth the next year, and it's been on the air ever since. It's been going strong ever since.
Would you consider that and you still have a lot in your career left, but is that your proudest kind of achievement so far, Living on Earth?
I think that was probably my first proud achievement. Every one of my jobs, it's astonishing. I just look back and I see how lucky I am that I've been as a journalist. I've really enjoyed that. I loved working on Living on Earth. We did a subsequent program that only lasted a year, called The Cultivated Gardener, when we were trying to, talk about those issues, talk about gardening and things like that. It was spin-off. I enjoyed that immensely. I enjoy, then I became an urban planner. And as a journalist, I love talking to people and hearing their stories and then translating those stories. As an urban planner, I still had to talk to people. I had to hear those stories instead of turning it into something that would go go out on the air or go into a newspaper. I had to turn it into an urban, a comprehensive plan. Usually that was my focus. And now the same thing as a professor. I still listen to people. I'm back to interviewing people as we did for this current project, but it's always about asking questions, trying to understand something, and then trying to present it in some way, shape, or form, or make it useful.
Would you say that that's probably the one transferable skills that you've held from every iteration of your career that you've had, which is, communication skills?
Yes. And it's one of the ones that in our research we found is, one of the most important ones, is being able to talk to people, being able to gather information, to listen to people. Because I think, communicating is often seen as sort of outwards, but it's really listening and understanding. And I tell students, when you go into the world, you're going to have to listen to all these people in the room, and in their heads, they think their position on this issue that you're talking about is correct. This is the issue is correct. And you have to try and understand why they have that position. What are their values? Dig down and say, okay, can we reach those values? I want to protect the environment, or I want to protect I don't want, a disturbing facility next to me, or whatever it is. How can we protect their values, but still, find ways to bring all the different values together in a project? And that's, a skill that you have to have, and listening is a big part of that, and digesting that information is really important.
Before we continue, I want to take a quick moment for those of you listening who might be thinking, I want to work in this space, but I don't know where to start. If that's you, I created something called the Green Pivot Map, a simple 90-day framework to help you clarify direction, translate your existing skills, and take strategic action toward environmental or climate work. It's not about going back to school or starting over, it's about positioning. If you'd like a copy, just message me Pivot on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at josealmanzaresq.com. Or you can also check the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the conversation. I'm going to ask you a question that might be a little unfair, but do you find that the current, how do I say this without casting a whole wide net on a generation, but are students today, do they have good communication skills?
Some do and some don't.
Okay. All right.
So I can't tell you. What you probably wanted to ask was, are they worse or better today than they were? And the honestly thing is, I hear that that students apparently don't. I haven't been teaching for all that long. 13 years is not that long in the scope of things. I do think they have challenges. I think there's focus challenges. I see it anecdotally. I don't study this, but I see it anecdotally in my students. I see it in my stepkids. I think the internet, for all its advantages and for all its ability to get us information, I think it is very distracting. I think social media is a curse that we're going to regret ever existed, because all it is, it just always works its way down to a really low level of discourse, and it's very distracting and addictive. And I think the EU just came out with a finding, a report, a judgment that Facebook is addicting, and Instagram is addicting. I don't remember which one it is, but and I think we're going to regret that. So I do think those are challenges, but did my colleagues back in Somerville when I was a student, were they better at this than, I mean, some of them were still clowns. So I couldn't really tell you. I don't want to disparage the current generation. The other thing that's nice, I will say, the other thing that's nice is I deal with people who are interested in the environment and sustainability. And these are people, young people who understand what they want, understand where their values are. So while many of them don't know what they're going to do for a job, they do have, values and a drive towards that end. I mean, I'm not going to say we have 250 majors in our department. Some of them, I mean, most of them are really driven to like think about these issues because they didn't pick a traditional major. They're not English majors or they're not pre-med or something like that. And that is very comforting. And it was, we have, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, but we had 3 students this past year who, for their final, to get out of our program, you have to do a capstone project. Well, in their project, them and 2 other students designed an education system for 5th graders. Well, 3 of them then put it on campus here, organized it all themselves. They went out into the community, talked to teachers. I mean, they used connections here at the school, but they got teachers on one day to bring their students here. They set up these stations around campus to teach them about different aspects. They got the state involved. They had state environmental people come out. They had people from Cornell Cooperative Extension come out. They had professors from the university there. And they, so they would do these 5th graders and they would just run them around these different stations all day. And they got food for them and they got ponchos in case it rained, and they did it all. And often students do this and they ask for help. One of them would come to me often, but usually they're asking for guidance, but they didn't actually, they did it all themselves. Like, and they asked us to do things that they couldn't do, like reserve rooms and stuff like that. But and that like inspires me. I mean, to see that those students did that that they wanted to, and that they pulled it off. And I heard from teachers who still wrote to me afterwards and said, because I went around and checked in on everything, and the teachers then, and then they wrote to me afterwards saying how good this whole thing, the students did a great job with their kids. And they did it all themselves. I would love to take credit for it, but these guys did it all themselves. And I'm so proud of them. And that gives me hope.
And the capstone is one component, certainly, of a student's, academic career. And I'm going to give you an opportunity now to boast a little bit about the new, Department of Environment and Sustainability at the school. But it's a very competitive job market right now, Professor Homsy. I mean, I'm sure you know this from students in your program that are going to be, either have recently graduated or are graduating. There are a lot of impressive students graduating from all sorts of institutions now. It seems like the market is just saturated with really, really high quality candidates. What are some things that Binghamton is doing, and specifically your department, to get these students to stand out or to be, ready for the competitive job market?
So what we are doing, a couple of things. One is experiences. So whether in a class, almost every class we teach has some hands-on component. You're gathering data in the field. You're working with a community group. You're writing a report as if it was going to go into a community, for a community, or it is an actual community. I had one class where we wrote 5 issue briefs for the city council in Binghamton because they wanted information on these issues, these environmental issues, and so the students did that for them. And so we're always trying to give them experiences. Some of the experiences, we have just started 2 trips to, there's a trip to the Everglades where students get to see management down there. And these are not just biology trips. These are like talking to people who are managing the Everglades and understanding the forces that are changing the Everglades and how those can be changed. We did the same thing. They just came back a couple of weeks ago from the national parks out west. We've had 14 students going out there. Occurring right now, it's a month-long course that we have it's called the White Mountain Environmental Field School. We teamed up with the World Trails Network for the Americas, and we offer this 30-day course, 4 credits, just like another summer school course. And you go and you live on in a base camp in the White Mountains, and you learn about trails. Now, that's not a very narrow focus, because through that, I mean, it is kind of a narrow focus on one hand, but at the same time, it has all these different components, because you have to talk about the ecology of the area. You have to talk about how people actually work on the trail, and you want to keep people on the trail so they don't destroy the nature next to the trail. So it's a lot about psychology and this management. So all these things come together in this part about this course that is ostensibly about trails, but it's really about the systems that we live in, the human natural interface that we live in. And that's what we're trying to do, is give these students hands-on experience so they can see things and can imagine things. And that is, I think, one of the most important things that we could do, is get them to be out there and do things. And then the other thing we like to do, and this is what you were brought to campus for, is get them to see people who do this work so they can imagine where they might be. So we have this undergraduate colloquium where we have change agents that you were on the panel of. And so we do that. We have things like that, not as big as that, but we have other little small things for our undergraduates during the year, and we need to grow those. We need to engage more alumni in that. At the graduate level, we have a colloquium where we bring people in every week to talk about their jobs, their challenges, their frustrations. And a lot of them are younger people. So we had one of the graduates of the program is now the sustainability director, manager, I can't remember her whole title, at Union College in Schenectady. So she was both able to talk about her job and how she has to navigate different politics at the college. She talked about their geothermal project, so people heard about that. But she also talked about how hard it was to get a job and how aggressive she had to be. And so I always tell students, look, even in the best of times, getting your first job is not easy. But what this person talked about was her persistence and how she would, send out a lot of interviews, resumes, prepare for the interviews. She talked, and we always talk about networking. I think that students getting to meet people in the field is really important. Doing informational interviews. When you go home over the summer, go and talk to, if you're interested in what the, say, New York City Department of Environmental Protection, what they're doing. We'll find some interesting people. Maybe if you're from a student at Binghamton University, some alum at Binghamton University. But whatever school you're at, talk to your alums who are in these fields. People love talking about what they do. And a lot of them recognize how important it is to give back. If they say no, it's probably because they don't have time. Most people will find time to talk to you for 15 minutes or an hour in person or over Zoom. And this both exposes you to different ways of thinking and jobs that are out there, but it's also your network. And so you talk to somebody and they may not have a job, but they may know somebody who has a job, or a job may come open in 6 months and they, at their place or that they hear of. And then you're not going to get the job because you talk to this person, but, they will say, oh, George Homsy's not crazy. He seemed like a good person. We should at least give him a chance and put him on a shorter list. And I think that is really important.
So you're saying some of the things that I try to express to young people when they reach out to me, or experienced people when they're trying to pivot, is the power of community, of your network. And here's the thing, that's not something that you can just build overnight. Like you
Yes.
can't, if you're a senior in college and you're quote unquote starting to network in May with the hopes of finding a job in June or July, like that's just not how it works.
Hmm.
Something that I wish that more schools did, and this is me hoping to plant a seed in your brain, Professor, is, you know, in impressing these ideas to students early in their academic career, because
Hmm.
there's really two components to the college experience, in my opinion. There's the academic and the substantive knowledge, which, we pay a lot of tuition to get that knowledge. We depend on the professors to steer us in the right direction and to build exciting curriculum that, address kind of a need that the students have in learning and enriching themselves more. But then there's this other component that I think is missed in many institutions, which is this whole notion of community building, networking, and building relationships, which should start in year one, so that by the time you're at year four, you've attended some conferences, you've
Hmm.
had a dozen or so informational interviews with professionals, and there are some students who are able to benefit from that if they have somebody close within their network that tells them that they should do that, or at least encourages them to. They have a parent who is aware of this, or maybe they're lucky enough to have a great conversation with a professor. But most students just kind of flounder in this kind of space, in large part because they don't know what they don't know, or they hear it from one parent. And then, when you hear something from a parent, you're like, this is dad, like
Yeah.
this is dad or mom. But if you hear, I mean, that's why I really like what Binghamton is doing, at least at Harper, is having these change agents discussions, inviting people like me and Adam to come and speak about our real life experiences and our advice, because it resonates a little differently with students when you hear from actual professionals doing the thing than just mom or dad or Professor Homsy. So I encourage the school to keep doing that, and encourage students to really think about those soft skills.
Hmm.
Those
And
soft skills.
those, when we did, I talked about the research we did interviewing people, those soft skills, and I hate calling them soft because they imply that they're lesser skills. But those personal people skills, we'll call them. Persistence, being strategic, political savvy. Those are the top three things that people said were important in their jobs. Relationship building, communication, listening, fostering buy-in. Nowhere in there is understanding water quality, sustainability. I mean, these are sustainability leaders, and nowhere do you hear those technical skills. At some level, those technical skills, of course, are a given. You have to understand enough about things in order to be strategic. But those are the skills that that people told us are important for their leaders.
I so I'm screaming from the top of a mountain these days, Professor, to students, both students graduating from college or grad school, or people that are working in non-environmental spaces but want to enter the space. And I'm telling people straight up, and it's kind of a bit of a hard truth. And I hate to say it this way, but this is really the only way that I can say that gets to people's heads, is like, they're not special. And I'm not saying this in a way that they're not special people, or that people don't love them or they don't care, but the job market is saturated with really, really good candidates from across the world. Like, you're no longer competing
Yes.
with just like a regional kind of thing. Like, if there's a job opening on LinkedIn, within an hour, the employer has 100 to 200 applicants, where probably 50 of them are highly qualified.
Yeah.
If you apply for a job 3 weeks after it's been posted, chances are it's already been filled, and they just
Yeah.
haven't had a chance to pull the listing down. So, what I'm saying I'm really telling everyone is, you have to start thinking of yourself as a brand. You have to start thinking of yourself as either a service or a product if you want to enter the workforce, because in many ways, you are going to be providing a service to your employer. And even if you're self-employed, where you're starting a business, like, you are a product, you are a service. So how do products and services differentiate themselves? Is by doing things a little differently than others, standing out a little differently. So to me, individuals really, there's two two to three ways to do that, but the most important one is you need to have a network of people that are out there thinking about you when you're not, and you can't be at every place at every time, and you can't see every job post.
Mhm.
But if you've got about 10 people in a close network that know who you are, what you stand for, your background, then they're out in the world thinking about you, thinking about opportunities. The other thing that I encourage people to do is, like, you don't need permission. I'll say this. Yes, if you can get a publication and get a peer-reviewed article, especially if you're a graduate student where you have an opportunity to really publish something that's really extremely high quality, yes, like, do that. But most students, especially undergraduate students, or frankly, professionals who are out working in the world, they just don't have the time or the resources to get something that's peer reviewed published. But
Yeah.
there's nothing stopping them from publishing their own work. Like right now, we've never been at a better time for people to publish their own things that they're interested in. So, for example, if you are interested in urban planning in the Midwest, let's just say that that's the topic,
Mhm.
or coastal ecology in the Pacific Northwest, like nothing stopping that individual from starting a Substack and posting a 500-word piece every 2 weeks on that. Maybe they see a headline for an article and they give their own spin on it. Maybe they see an article, they don't even have to create the content initially, they could just comment on it. Then they've got this kind of body of work that follows them. So then when they apply for a job or when they're networking, they can say, oh, yeah, no, this topic really interests me. And by the way, here's a list of published works that I've had. And to me, people just have to get a little creative in distinguishing themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I tell students all the time, you have to have your story. And the work that you do at Binghamton University in the class or at, in the community, that's part of your story, and you have to find a way to fit it together. I think doing a Substack is an interesting way to do it, but you have to commit to it too, and you have to
Yes.
commit to quality. And
Yes.
that is because if it's crap, they're going to see you produce crap.
That's yeah.
Um,
It's a given. Yes. I was putting the cart before the horse, but yes, certainly,
yeah.
it's implied that it's going to be at least good quality, if not great
Yeah.
quality.
But I think that idea of a brand, of a story is important. And so we do these. So I mentioned in class, we did these memos for the City Council of Binghamton. Well, that's part of someone's story, the one that you worked on. And even if you worked on something about electric vehicles and you're going for a job about endangered species, you have to understand that you can use that, because what you did there was gather information, organize information, present information in a way that policymakers can make a decision. And the policymakers in this case were city council, politicians, but they could be your bosses at a business or at a nonprofit. I mean, every job is like that. And those are the skills that people really need, are the ability to like get that information through listening, through research, organizing that information, and then making it useful, either so you can make a decision if you're the boss, or presenting it to your boss, or presenting it to city council, or presenting it to, the board of your nonprofit, so that decisions can be made, or presenting it publicly so people can vote a certain way. I mean, this is, I think, the essence of what this is what all citizens should be able to do, is doing all of that. That's what I would like students graduating from our program to do. Um, and I think, again, now I've wandered a little bit, but that's part of your story, is the ability to do this. So you can then be open to different kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. You don't
I,
have to be a technical, like you have to know some basic technical stuff, perhaps, but you have to be able to ask these questions. I mean, and be able to organize, at least coming from our field, being able to organize the technicians.
So we've spent a decent amount of time speaking about undergraduate students, and rightfully so. Binghamton being an academic institution. Um, what would you say to, the 10 or 15-year professional, somebody who's perhaps maybe they've worked in local government or journalism or public administration, and they've become inspired by something? They had a conversation with someone, or they're seeing the wildfires from Canada affecting, their family, and they feel inspired to work in the environmental or sustainability space. What advice would you give to that 10 to 15-year professional who wants to enter the environmental or sustainability space? How would they break in?
So one thing is, remember, your current story isn't just limited to what it is applicable to other places. So, if you worked in the budgeting office and you wanted to, maybe you can do budgeting for a nonprofit and get into these other spaces. That's part of your story. One thing, you could always go back to school and get a credential. That's what our Sustainable Communities master's degree is for. You could go to intern somewhere. You could volunteer at an organization, so you can both start to meet people, but also start to learn where you might want to enter the space. And, if you've got established, we have, we have mostly younger people in our master's program, but we have older people who are trying to think, I do want to make change. And then the other thing to recognize is sometimes change is, you can do it without changing careers. So if you work in a company or at a university or at a, whatever, a nonprofit, if you take that sustainability mindset to your colleagues and your customers and your clients, those are really important. So you don't necessarily have to be in the space. Sorry, I got off the point of your question, which is, though, some people do want to get into the space. And that is, I do think internships, getting experience, maybe going back to school, and then thinking about how your story translates into this new environment, I think, are really important.
But you also said something super important that I think gets forgotten. People get inspired and they figured, you know what I'm doing at my current employer or my current situation, I got to blow that whole thing up, and I got to go work for the Sierra Club, or I got to go work for, a big government agent, the Environmental Protection Agency. And it's like, whoa, yes, that is an option, but let's take a step back. Like, how about where you are right now? Are there any opportunities, like any low hanging fruit? So to your point, if somebody is inspired to work in the environmental space, they can perhaps have an opportunity to create that space within the organization they're in.
Yeah.
One of the my first interviewee that I had on this podcast, she described how she was working for a tech company. She was an attorney in-house, and she saw an opportunity to essentially work within their kind of charitable volunteer wing of the company. It was like an employee, organization internally. And she said, hey, the environment and sustainability is really important to me. And then she ended up chairing that internal employee group. And then she just turned it into an ESG group. And then the company saw the value in her kind of doing that they made her kind of the head of environment for the company.
Mhm.
She created that
whole thing.
And that's just one example. Another thing is, again, people think they have to blow up their whole lives to work in the environmental space. And you know what? Maybe you have a good job that pays you a good salary, or maybe you love the people you work with, or maybe you've worked really hard to get to where you are. That doesn't mean that you then have to give that up to still give back in a meaningful way. And this sounds really hokey and corny, but like, there are plenty of small organizations in people's communities that need people on nights and weekends to help out. And, in between hours, they're understaffed and they need bodies to help. So you could be that person. If you're really good at communicating or social media, you could go be their social media manager on your own time. If you're really good at numbers, if you're an accounting person, you could all of a sudden be their volunteer accountant. and you're giving back in a way that, okay, maybe you're not going out and tagging, birds and monitoring the growth of, resurging species, but you're still helping the cause one way or the other.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I want to go to your first point about making change within your organization. I mean, the move to an ESG group is good, but it could even be more simple and easier to sell, perhaps. We bought a house here in Binghamton not long ago, so I have a lot of contractors coming through. Very expensive, but every time they come up, they're driving a van. I know those vans. I talk to them. They don't go very far. Why are those not all electric vans? It would save the company so much money, and it would do so good for the planet. And as we slowly convert our fleet here at the university to electric vans, I think the locksmith uses an electric van now, apparently loves it because it's quiet. You don't need to fill it up with gas. You plug it in at night. I mean, and I don't know the person. I don't know if they have an environmental bent or not, but these things are so practical that it's easier to convince your bosses from a financial or health perspective that these are ways to go.
So, and I know we're almost at an hour, and I really appreciate you taking
bro.
time with me and our listeners today. So I just want to ask you maybe two more questions, and I'll try to keep this one brief. But for somebody and this will be an opportunity, nod, wink, wink, for you to boast a little bit about the program, but somebody who's sitting at home right now listening to this and thinking, man, I really want to, pad my resume a little bit or learn a little more substantively, and they're thinking about different master's programs, or undergraduate programs. Like, why should they consider Binghamton? Why should they consider the fact that Binghamton now has, as of April, a new Department of Environment and Sustainability? I mean, you're the hot new kid in town. Like, why should someone consider Binghamton?
Because we are investing in this at an academic level. We are getting new hires. We are revamping our curriculum to start thinking about these things, how they fit in the world with the important issues, how they can help people get jobs. I mean, we have the university itself has like the Fleischman Center, which can help people get jobs. We work with them in environment and sustainability. We regularly have our own programs for our own students for these things. And we're always trying to think of ways to sort of help our students find their place and try and find a job. And recognizing at the undergraduate level, not everyone's going to go into the environment. This is a major. We hope we are creating good citizens. The people who might go off and work at a company and say, why don't we make all our vans electric? Okay, it makes complete sense. Thinking about those things, or I'm going to vote this way. So that's what we try and do. We try and give our students experiences. Again, this is very, very important. Whether it's, I taught a class, and they're still teaching it, of 230 students. And we still did little research projects out in the community and out in the field to give students experiences so that they can touch things. And it only gets better from there. When you get into the smaller classes and you get to doing more like research the way I would do it, or research the way professional people would do it. We have all these opportunities. Our capstone classes are often community engaged. And I think these are really important. Also, upstate New York is gorgeous. You should come to Binghamton for many reasons.
On both of those points, Professor. So I grew up in New York City. I was born in Dominican Republic, as I've mentioned in the past, and but my childhood was New York City, and I got into Binghamton, and I decided to go because at the time it was either number one or number two in the SUNY. It and Stony Brook kind of tend to go up and down.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's been in the last 20 years, but I got into Binghamton. And I said, well, I didn't even know that was a part of New York, because I was so New York City. I was so New York City centric, downstate centric. But I said, you know what? I'm going to go. I mean, it's a great school. And at the time, I had an environmental studies inclination. And I have to tell you, I completely and utterly fell in love with Western New York and just upstate New York in a way that I I have never. I'm so grateful that I was able to experience upstate New York in the way that I did. And now I sit on the board of the Adirondack Park Agency,
Mhm.
which I've mentioned to you, and that's kind of my way of giving back to the state of New York. I mean, I try to push as many people into upstate New York to enjoy the Catskills and the Adirondacks because, man, New York is just a jewel of a state. I mean, it's so gorgeous.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is, when I was in undergrad at Binghamton and I declared environmental studies, even then, when it was just a program under the geology department, I had still to this day remember some of the great experiences of being out in the field doing. I mean, one of the classes that I took, I think every other class we were in the nature preserve observing
Mhm.
and journaling. I took an environmental impact statement course with Professor Montz, I believe, at the time. And it was just the school, at least back then, and it sounds like you're doubling and quadrupling down on this, giving students real hands-on experiences. So I commend you on that, and I encourage you to keep going. Um, Professor, I'm going to ask you just one more question. This one's a bit of a bonus. Um, what do you, in your free time, when you're not thinking about papers or thinking about department chairs or, stepchildren visiting, what are you doing in your spare time? What are you reading or watching or consuming that's keeping up, in your free time?
Well, we do hiking. I mentioned that before, and that is important to us. And we've come 2 or 3 times lately because we're very busy. We come to the nature preserve here and you can get a real good hike in there. And there's a lot of places, as I said, all around in upstate New York and northern Pennsylvania that are just beautiful hiking places. We do that. I also one of my projects, it was called Heritage and Sustainability Neighborhood Project. A few years ago, I started it with an anthropologist, and we worked in one of the communities in Binghamton. And as a result of that, we started a community center. And so I still am there and give back in that. And there we both have, programs that feed and clothe people, keeping them alive. And then we're trying to find ways to boost people up too. So, you know, can you do more with art? Can we do more with your resume? Can we, what are ways that we can help you move your, for those who can, not everyone can. And we love people who just come and just need to eat or just want to eat or just want to socialize. But sometimes, we also want to give a little bit more as well. And so I work there a lot.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'm glad. First of all, anyone listening, I mean, if you can find your way to, again, upstate New York, and Binghamton is a beautiful nature preserve. And you're right, there's just on campus. There's also some beautiful hiking. So I'm glad you're still out and about. Professor, really appreciate you being here with us today. Any final words for people that are interested in kind of environmental sustainability and maybe they're sitting on the sidelines and want to join us?
In some way, shape, or form, just do it. I mean, just find, through this many episodes of this podcast, not just this one, but even in this one, we've talked about different ways in. And if you want to, as an undergrad or grad, want to come to Binghamton University, reach out. I can always talk to people about this stuff. I love talking, as you can imagine. And so I'm happy to chat with anyone who might be interested in joining us here at this or want to know good hiking places in upstate New York. Happy to
Thank
share
you.
those as well.
Amazing. Well, everyone listening, that's Professor George Homsy over at Binghamton University, chair of the Department of Environment and Sustainability. You can find him at gomsy@binghamton.edu. Do not look for him on LinkedIn. he will probably not answer you.
Yes.
His last post was from like 10 years ago. I did notice that. But Professor, really appreciate you being here with us and looking forward to continuing this discussion. As an alumni of the school and a graduate with a degree in environmental studies, I'm glad it took us a long time to connect, but I'm glad we were able to reconnect.
Yes, I'm very glad as well. Thank you for the invitation to talk with you and your audience today. And I look forward to working with you in this space and in other spaces going forward.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks for listening to the Green Collar Careers podcast. If you're realizing that your current work no longer fits, or you're feeling pulled toward environmental or climate work, but aren't sure how to make the transition, you're exactly who this podcast is for. I've developed a simple framework called the Green Pivot Map. It's designed to help professionals reposition their existing skills and take intentional steps into environmental careers over the first 90 days. You can get a copy by messaging me Pivot on LinkedIn or visiting my website, josealmanzaresq.com, or you can use the link in the show notes. If this episode was helpful, please subscribe, leave a rating, and share it with someone else who's trying to build a more purpose-driven career. I'm Jose Almanzar. Thank you so much for listening. This is Green Collar Careers.